Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, cult of personality.
You are. Jason has so many followers who are hanging on his every word and afraid of angering him and being banished.
Josh, just drink the Kool-Aid, baby. Just drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, thanks. That's fun. So in this season of Awesome Movie Year, we are talking about the films of 2012, and we are here at my pick, which is all about a cult. Or is it a cult? We'll probably not.
I mean, it is.
No, that's true.
Either way.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It is a cult. Whether the cult's tenets are valid or not is a question that we can't quite answer, maybe, but we'll delve into that. It is the film Sound of My Voice, directed by Zal Batmanglij and co-written by him and Brit Marling, who is also the co-star of this film as the cult leader, Maggie, who claims to be from the future. And this this was my number one pick, my number one film on my top 10 list in 2012. And so it seemed like the obvious choice to pick. And I was hoping it would hold up. And I think it mostly did. So it was on my top 10 list because it was commercially released in theaters in 2012. It had premiered, however, in 2011 at the Sundance Film Festival, and then was picked up by Fox Searchlight and released in April 2012 in theaters in the US. It was not a huge hit. It grossed $408,000 on its budget of $135,000. So, it did all right, but those are very small numbers.
That's not a good. That didn't do all right.
I mean,
that's probably what
it made its budget.
Well, Josh, as you know, it has developed a cult. Following,
yes, a cult movie with a cult following. So, yeah, no, and you're right. It's not only the budget. I'm sure Fox Searchlight spent more than $400,000 on
to market and buy it. Yeah. It's like don't be a stand for it, Josh, just because it was number one on.
Well, I mean, I am. I'm a big fan of this film, and even if it wasn't a box office hit, it clearly was a good launching point for both Brit Marling and Zal Batmanglij, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, it wasn't, as a lot of Sundance movies are that are kind of big sensations. And this was the Sundance year of Brit Marling, right? Because she kind of came out of nowhere as the star and co-writer of these two science fiction movies. It was this movie and Another Earth that she co-wrote and that was directed by Mike Cahill, which I believe ended up being the first one that was released in theaters. But this was like, went from unknown to this like next big thing based on Sundance that year.
Yeah. And I mean, look, and I'm not saying this harshly, but clearly, the next big thing didn't really go that way, but she's still working an interesting actor and probably more interesting than if she had become the next big thing.
Right. And my impression, especially based on the career path that she's taken, is that being the next big thing as an actor wasn't really something that she was aiming for. So, but you're right. Like a lot of big Sundance hype, this didn't pan out in that same way. This was not a big hit. And Another Earth, I don't know the numbers, but it made more money than this, but it certainly was not like a big box office hit either.
Yeah, but we don't know if you're simping for that one the same way.
I will say that I am not. I actually don't think that movie's very good at all. But that's not what this episode is about. It did get nominated for a couple of Independent Spirit Awards for Best First Feature.
Josh, beep, 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 breaking news. Beep, pop, pop, pop. Another Earth had a budget of $100,000 and made $1.9 million. Now that's a hit.
So yeah, it did definitely better than this. It definitely did. And I remembered it. I feel like Another Earth got a wider release too. I remember that being in more theaters, and I could be wrong about that, but it seemed.
Well, it had William Mapplethorpe, who was this probably around this time on Lost, where he was kind of like a hot commodity for a minute.
Yeah, that may be the case. He was a known name, sort of, or at least a face that people recognized from having seen him on TV. Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that one. I was excited for both of these based on what I had heard out of Sundance, and that one let me down, but this one did the opposite of letting me down. because
based on all your moles at Sundance.
Yes. Well, just, I mean, all the coverage that you read out of Sundance and all the reviews. And this sounded like, especially these movies being these kind of cerebral sci-fi films, artsy sci-fi films, I tend to like that sort of thing. So it was something that I was eager to check out.
And now we revisit it here on your pick.
On my pick, exactly. That's how the cycle works here.
Although, Josh, if you want to get, really kind of esoteric about it, you did watch it, and now we're kind of talking about it again in a different iteration. So in a way, it mimics another Earth, not the sound of my voice, which really only 3 people and perhaps the entire audience will understand, having seen both of those films. Go on, Josh.
All right, but it's the same film. It's not like an alternate dimension version of the film. It's the same movie.
But Josh, you're not the same as you once were.
True, but I'm not an alternate dimension version of myself. I'm actually more like Maggie because I'm just myself in the future.
In the future.
Versus myself in the past when I first saw this movie.
Well, but that's what you're saying, but I don't know if I can believe you. Literally, Josh, if you haven't watched these movies, none of this is making any sense.
Yeah, but it's fun anyway.
Babble.
Fun anyway. Good times on our time traveling pod. We're going to get our future selves to come back and be our guests on this podcast to see what they think of this.
Download us in the future and download us now. That'll be good.
It's interesting. Like in the same year, she did a time travel movie and then a dimensional or interplanetary travel movie.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the stuff that she's done as her career has gone on, clearly this kind of sci-fi-ish thing is what she's interested in exploring in future work that she's done as a writer and producer. So this movie, and maybe this is part of the reason why it wasn't as big as Another Earth, which, like I said, I didn't care for, but overall I think was maybe slightly better reviewed. This movie got mixed to positive reviews. So Roger Ebert said, "Sound of My Voice is a sci-fi thriller made with smoke and mirrors. No special effects, no other worlds, only the possibility of time travel, which you can't show but can only talk about. The key figure here is Brit Marling, who co-wrote the script with the director Zal Batmanglij. She also starred in and co-wrote Another Earth, a much better film. Both films use their sci-fi premises as an avenue into human stories that might not be quite as compelling without them. She is a talent with an understated presence, and she demonstrates with Batmanglij that you can conjure out of a very small budget a quietly compelling film. Sound of My Voice makes me very interested in what she'll come up with next."
Yeah, so I think those are fair points. Like, I've seen this and Another Earth. I like this one better too, but I think understated is a good way to describe her as a performer.
Yeah.
And it is interesting. I was kind of hoping that there would be more in between, like when this came out, and I know that they've done more TV, but really after this, it was just The East. That was the only other movie.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think maybe partly that was because this wasn't as big a hit as maybe they were hoping for, given its Sundance buzz. And then The East, which had, I'm sure, a much bigger budget and some more recognizable stars in it, was not a hit at all, I don't believe. So you get to that point and, you got to pivot to TV or get hired to direct a Marvel movie or something, because the original stuff isn't hitting as much as you would hope.
Josh, The East had a $6.5 million budget, made $2.4 million at the box office.
Yeah, that's no good.
And came out in 2013. So really, they've really moved heavily into TV.
Right. Yeah. And this also was originally conceived as potentially like an episodic project. And then when it was put together as a feature film, it was meant to be like the first part of a trilogy. So I feel like this long form storytelling is something that Brit Marling and Zal Batmanglij had always had in mind. And maybe TV is the place that's been best for them.
Right. This was supposed to be a web series, and you kind of see it play out in these chapters in the film that I don't know if the breaking up via, title card 1, 2, 3 adds anything.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I don't think it's detrimental. It's just a quick little moment, but it doesn't. There's one transition, I think, where you see the title card and suddenly we're with a character that we've never seen before and we don't really know what she's doing. The Justice Department, the FBI agent. But otherwise, it doesn't really. It seems almost arbitrary at times where those title cards come in.
Yeah, I think so. I did note, in my re-identification of this film, Josh, that I like the story, the way they tell the story, but I feel like they maybe rely on one too many tricks here, one or two too many tricks that like don't add up with the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that maybe don't add up because they're not trying to add them up yet, or they're letting you add them up yourself. But I can see how that can be frustrating, certainly. And
Example, like there's a narrator, right, who tells us the history of the two main characters and then never does anything else. It's not a narration in the beginning of the movie. It's like 10, 20 minutes in, and then, hey, this guy, this is what happened to him, and this lady, this is where she's all about, and then you never hear from her again. It's not an effective usage of that, I don't think.
yeah, that was a little odd, and it had me wondering, like, who is narrating? Is this supposed to be one of the characters that I just didn't realize that was their voice? And it's not. It's just someone is credited as narrator in the credits, and that's not a person who does anything else. So that is a little weird as a device. I guess I was thinking more of like plot threads that are left hanging. But yeah, you're right. That is sort of a device that comes in. And maybe if it were a web series and that was like one, 3-minute segment or whatever, you'd just be like, oh, this is the one where there's a narrator, but where it's plopped in the middle of a movie, it's a little strange.
Right. And it's an easy fix because these two are making an amateur documentary. So we could have easily put a scene in where they're narrating about each other.
Yeah. I guess it just didn't really bother me that much. I kind of went with it, but I can see how it confused me for a second, but then I just let it go.
Yeah. But hey, Josh, make a note on that plot threads issue, because I have a few questions in the next segment.
Of course, I'm sure we'll get into that. There are plenty of questions to raise. So Wesley Morris in the Boston Globe said, any skepticism with this movie begins to mirror skepticism in The Cult. And the stroke of brilliance is that psychological suspense is built into the structure of both what's on screen and our response to it. Sound of My Voice is a shrewdly inscrutable movie. Even after Maggie asks Peter, that's our main male character, to demonstrate his devotion in a manner that turns the film into a real thriller, it has no true genre. It's as much a satire as a mystery, a film as much about art as it is about faith. And Maggie might be as much Lady Gaga and Marina Abramovich, a high-impact performance artist, as she is a figure of oracular salvation. So the spell the movie casts is effective. Even after we know who Maggie is, we don't.
Not effective is that review.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the only review that mentioned that this is sort of satirical in some way, and that's not something I got out of it at all.
Yeah, where's the satire in this?
I mean, the satire of, and this is the next review I have, although I didn't quote this part, but of like LA people, in that bit that you're just citing with the narration that tells you kind of the background of our two main characters, the couple who are trying to make a documentary. The female character has this background as like a sort of privileged Hollywood kid, the daughter of a studio executive or something, and a model. And, she's sort of a dilettante who's tried all these various things, and now she's going to be a documentary filmmaker or whatever. I guess you could argue that that's
where's the satire,
right?
there?
That the idea
they built a character,
right? No, I mean, I agree with you, but I mean, that's I think what some people are looking at this as making fun of artistic ambition, maybe, or pretentiousness, rather.
I mean, I think you could easily have created a satirical film, like you think of like Woody Allen Bananas or something, right? Like where it's like, hey, we're going to go undercover into this cult and expose them for who they are. And then the story goes comedically as these two become like, or one of them becomes like the most devoted cultee, right? Then that could be a satire, but this was not that at all.
No, and I didn't think it was comedic. And I mean, I think maybe what these reviews are thinking is that they couldn't take it seriously. And instead of saying that that's just a failure of the movie, they're trying to sort of spin it as maybe that's the point, that it wasn't meant to be taken seriously, that it was satirical. But I mean, I could take it seriously. And also, I don't think that that's the intent. But
yeah, I mean, nobody does comedy quite like Brit Marling, right, Josh?
Yeah. So again, Karina Longworth in The Village Voice sort of had this angle on it. She said, Sound of My Voice has the hallmarks of the uninspired micro-budget calling card. The bland, jittery visual realism can't counteract overheated performances of tin-eared dialogue, which strain for pulp but often land at soap. But an unusual ambition shines through. At its essence, a noir mystery in which a self-appointed detective is spun around by potentially fatale femmes, Sound of My Voice's open-ended climax sketches the outlines of an enjoyably loony, time and space-bending, vaguely political apocalyptic conspiracy. But barely cinematic enough to fill the space of the big screen, the film ultimately feels like a teaser prologue for something that doesn't yet exist.
Well, I disagree with most of that, but I do agree that in both this and this is my big thing with Brit Marling, in this and in Another Earth, right when it ends, you're like, wait a second, come on, this is the meat now. You finally got me to the place where I'm juiced up, and then you don't see anymore. Like the moment you want to see more is when she's like, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, and I think in part you can attribute that here to the idea that they were expecting to have a sequel or hoping to have a sequel of some kind. Maybe they had some ideas in mind for how things would follow up or things would come together. And I totally understand the frustration at the end of this movie thinking, like you said, hey, we finally got to something now. Why is the movie over? But I like all the ambiguity and the uncertainty of this movie. And it concerns me that I feel like if they had kept going and if they had made a sequel where we learned more specifically what really is or isn't going on, that it would have ended up being disappointing.
Yeah, I don't know how that would have played out either. And I don't mind the ending. I just wanted a little more here.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. But I don't know. Watching it again, I remembered that was sort of the idea, but without remembering specifically what happens. And we got to the end and I kind of felt like emotionally, at least, I got to a nice closing point, even if plot wise, there's a lot left unsaid there.
Well, Josh, as long as you got closure, that's all that matters.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pick. So, Jason, did we see this together? Did you see this when it came out? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it in the theater. I think this was like one, as you said, you got all your cronies there at Sundance telling you what's going on. And then we saw this one and I felt pretty much the same both times.
Yeah. Yeah. My cronies of reviews that I read online. It's a real network of connections I got there.
Well, it's better than your cuck betas at the Las Vegas Film Critics Society.
Yeah, some of them go to Sundance. They might have mentioned something to me.
Sycophants.
Yeah. So I like this. Like I said,
Neophytes.
I had it as my number one movie of 2012. I really like.
What was number 2?
Oh, I don't know. Do you want me to look this up?
Well, yeah, you said it. Now we need that hot goss, buddy.
All right, give me a second here. I got to find this.
But this is the type of movie that you would put as number 1. Mixed reviews, female ingenue, as like the lead. No one in the world had heard of it at the time. This is a classic Josh number 1 pick.
I mean, some people had heard of it. Like I said, it was a big Sundance hyped. Okay, here we go. This is from the time of 2012. My number 2 movie was Argo. So,
wow.
Not a movie that no one had heard of. But
it wasn't your number 1.
It wasn't my number 1. No, it was number 2. And spoiler, we are going to talk about it later this season.
But it won the best picture. It's not a spoiler.
No, it's not a spoiler. We don't really need to shroud that in mystery. So, yeah, I mean, I had a mix on my top 10 list that year of bigger stuff like Argo and smaller stuff like this. And I feel like that's typically how I end up. But this movie just, it stuck with me. I remember feeling like really on edge watching this movie, that it's suspenseful and it's eerie and it's unsettling. And I like that about it.
Yeah, it's a good mood piece and the mood carries all the way through.
Yeah, totally. So Dave, did you see this back in 2012?
I'm pretty sure I saw it in the theater. I have it written down here in my notes. Gina says that Brit Marling is her celebrity crush. So we watched all of the Brit Marling things as well as the show and all that. So I think we watched it in the theater, but we definitely watched them all when they first came out, at least on VOD.
Gina gets a hall pass for Brit Marling.
That's it. That's her.
She's going to join the cult.
Who's your celebrity crush, Dave?
I don't really have crushes anymore. I'm too old for that.
Oh, okay.
All right. But Gina's a big fan of anything about cults, right? Isn't that kind of her thing?
That too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Was she in a cult?
I was going to make a Catholicism joke, but maybe leave that.
That would have been good. That would have been good. So, maybe she's in one now. She could be, Amway or any of those, what are those called?
Multi-level marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, for sure. She loves those shows about all those freaks.
Yeah, it's I feel like this is maybe like ahead of its time with how many shows and docuseries and whatever there are examining cults and whatever. It's a huge industry.
It's not ahead of its time. It's a movie about a cult, Josh.
Well, I didn't mean it's like revolutionary. I just meant it's slightly in advance of what became a larger trend.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, sure.
Okay.
We'll go with that.
All right. Didn't mean to make you angry about it. It's just
it's just a good little sci-fi movie.
It is a good little sci-fi movie. I agree. All right, fine. Jason, we'll let you calm down here for a moment and we'll come back and talk about our general thoughts on Sound of My Voice. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2012, we are talking about my pick, Sound of My Voice. And Jason, you did like this though, right? I feel like we have a lot. Yeah. We have a lot of episodes
I like this movie
where I pick a movie and I'm like, I love this movie. It's so great. It really spoke to me. And Jason's just, okay.
Well, Josh, in my defense, you pick a lot of trash. So
I mean, and we've had the opposite dynamic as well with some of your picks. So I'm not saying it's only a one-way street.
Again, in my defense, your taste is questionable.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's
no. I like this movie. This is again one of those like quick heater sci-fis. Good performances. They ratchet up the tension and keep it there throughout. There's one amazing scene towards the end where you're like, whoa, like now I want to know more. And then they don't let you know anymore. Right. Which is frustrating. But it's like, talk about a good use of money. I mean, this thing was, like you said, $100,000. And it felt, I don't know why the review said, oh, it didn't feel like it belonged on a big screen. I thought they like utilized the small sets that you would want in a good way here.
Yeah. And I think one thing that happens a lot, and I see a lot of low budget sci-fi movies, like straight to VOD movies and stuff like that, for work purposes. And one of the biggest flaws of those movies is when they try to do more than their budget allows them to do. And this is a movie where it doesn't attempt, like their budget would not have afforded them the chance to do certain things. And so instead of doing that in a crappy looking way that takes you out of the movie, they just talk about it. They just imply it or whatever, right? You get a lot of mileage out of Maggie, out of Brit Marling, just the way that she describes the future without having to show anything. And you can just imagine it. And that works a lot better.
Well, I also think that works because we don't know if this character is who she says she is. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Okay, Josh, my point is we don't know if she really is what she claims to be, right? Or if she's a scam artist. So like the more vague she can be, right, the less that she has to answer for. And when someone calls her out on it, when she brings up the Cranberries song, which is a hit in 2054, is it?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, 2054.
She's like, oh yeah, that it might be by some band named the Cranberries, but where I'm from, Benetton made it famous.
Right. And I should have looked this up. I was wondering if like that song was in an ad for Benetton or whatever, because that would have been an even bigger.
Oh, you should have looked that up.
Yeah. I don't know. But I mean, she says it's like a singer named Benetton in the future has made this famous. And
he's looking.
I'm looking, sorry. It doesn't look like it. The top result is a clip from the movie. So it doesn't look like that it was actually.
Oh, my life.
But Jason's going to sing it anyway, because
I love the Cranberries.
They're good.
Josh.
And it's a good song.
Yeah.
And Jason, I'm sure it'll still be played in 2054 if the world still exists. So,
well, yeah, that's the real debate.
That's the big question here.
But also, it does feel like a good cult song. Like if you were in a cult, that would be a good one.
Right. And if you listen, she sings it in this kind of eerie way, and you really end up paying attention to the lyrics because she's just singing it a cappella. And you think like this, it sounds like some sort of weird culty thing potentially about the connections that these people are making and stuff like that. It could be something. But yeah, the tension here over, is Maggie really from the future or is she a fraud? And I think also the question of, if she's a fraud, like, what is she trying to accomplish here? Which is a thing that we don't really ever find out, is another question. And those are all enticing.
Well, the frustrating things are, like you said, those loose threads, right? Where that federal agent says she's wanted for arson and for burglary, right? And like, we know nothing of that side of her. We know nothing of that side of her. So, is that what is going on? Is that true? Is it not true? We see when this woman checks into her hotel room, she checks everywhere in the room to see if there's like a bug, to see if there's any recording devices around. Like, we know nothing about that character and we see very little of that character. So for it to have such a big impact on the movie, I could see why people would want to know a little more at that point.
Right. And I was wondering, again, this time, because I didn't remember enough of the plot details, like, is that woman even really an FBI agent?
Right. I think that's a fair question.
Yeah.
Could be like Robert Patrick in Terminator 2.
Yeah, well, maybe. She's also from the future. I mean, I came down on the side of her being real only because at the very end of the movie, the actual police come in and arrest Maggie. And presumably that only happens because she's a real cop and has set that up. But
do they, Josh? Or is that just another one of your, situations that appears to be something that it's not conspiracy theorists?
That could be. It could be that they're not real cops and we only see them for a few seconds as they drag Maggie away there at the end. But I think you're meant to ask all these questions, that they have that scene where we see the FBI agent or whoever she is checking her hotel room for bugs, because that's a weird thing. And you're meant to wonder, who is this person and why is she doing this? And is she an antagonist to our main characters or what? And I think the movie wants you to question all that stuff because it puts you in the position of the characters where they too don't ever really know what's real all the way through to the end of the movie.
Right. So we've already established there's this woman who claims she's a time traveler and she woke up in a bathtub and ended up on the street and was just, I guess, homeless and doing drugs and all this bad stuff, Josh, that you do in these situations. And
when you're a time traveler from the future.
Right. But then this guy found her based on her tattoos. Like, right. How do we know, like, what? Who is this guy? How did he find her? How did he hear about her? We don't know. Right. Then he takes her into a basement and now she's a cult leader. And I get it how, cults, it's like a word of mouth type thing, Josh, so I get that. But the whole thing is these two are Peter and Lorna are let's go make this documentary, and they start to believe her. Do they not? And there's good tension there. And then at the end, when we finally think we might get to an answer, she's taken away from us and we don't know anything anymore.
Right. And I think there are a lot of those questions. One of the questions that I wondered about this time was that character Klaus, who is the older man who she says he found her on the streets. And like you said, Jason, we don't know why he found her or how he knew to look for her, because he's not supposed to be from the future. But
right. But he's looking for her specifically because he says, have you seen, he's asking about the woman with the tattoos or whatever.
Right, so. Exactly. And what she says too is that, she woke up in this hotel room. She didn't have any memories. She wandered around homeless for some period of time, didn't know what was going on. And then Klaus finds her, picks her up, takes her with him, and he helps her remember. And so you have to wonder, what is his role in this? And they never really expand on that. But that made me think that somehow maybe he was the real cult leader, that he uses this mentally ill, confused homeless woman as a conduit. And at the very end, again, when the cops come in and take her away, and one of the other true believer cult members is yelling at Peter, how could you have done this? And Klaus comes in and pulls her away and says, let's call the attorney. We've done this before. I know what to do here. So he was a figure that I kind of wanted to know more about.
Yeah. And what a good plan. If you are going to start a cult and you don't want the heat on you, you find a mentally ill homeless person and, put that person out front. Good lesson from this film.
Well, I mean, or you can say you find a young, attractive woman and put her out at the front of your cult.
That's a good one too. Or, I mean, I think a young, attractive man would have worked there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But not weird, kind of squirrely looking older guy, right?
Dave, what cult was Gina in besides? I mean, she's going for it. Actually, Josh, Dave and I, we do the yoga. We're not that far from cult.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know there's certain like subsets of yoga that really are cults, right?
Yeah.
The whole Bikram thing has gotten really off the deep end in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, there are a lot of podcasts about that if you want to listen.
Yeah, there's tons. Yeah. Like I said, it's a boom that is subsequent to this film. But Jason doesn't buy that idea.
I don't think it has anything to do with this.
I didn't say that it did. I'm just saying that this was dealing with subject matter that has now become much more prevalent.
So, Josh,
yes.
Here's a question, right? There's this little girl, Abigail Pritchett, right? And she kind of like passes out on the ground sometimes, right?
Right.
And then we see her father inject medicine into her. Is she sick or is he making her sick?
Yeah, I wondered that too. And he injects it like between her toes, which is something that drug addicts do when they can no longer find veins in their arms or whatever. And you wonder if that's maybe because he doesn't want it to be seen that she's been injected with medication into like her arms or something like that. But she also has her own whole weird thing. She's building these weird like Lego sculptures constantly in the house, right? And he has to sort of pull her away from them in order to get her to go to bed. And she seems like a little weird cult leader in the making as well. And of course, the big moment, the one moment that seems to potentially confirm that Maggie might really be from the future is when Abigail Pritchett, who Maggie has claimed is the young version of...
Spoiler alert.
Well, we've spoiled this whole thing already.
Yeah, watch the movie.
Just extensively talked about the very end. That Maggie claims is her mother, her young, the young version of her mother. And they do this elaborate secret handshake together that has been the symbol of the cult members connecting with each other. And somehow Abigail knows it. And that to me is, it's the one moment where you think, how would we explain this away, right?
Well, and she says to Maggie, how did you know my secret handshake? And because Maggie claims that Abigail's her mom in the future and everything. And she says, you taught it to me.
Right. And that's a creepy moment, but I can see how also that's a moment where you think, whoa, let's unpack that. And then the movie's over like 2 minutes later.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I wanted that because like that scene resonates, right? And it's visceral and you feel it and you're like, what does this mean? And then like, what does this mean? And Peter's like, I don't know what it means.
Right.
And that's the end of the movie. And it's like, you dildos.
I mean, whereas I feel like I can sympathize with that, but the idea that Peter is left just as baffled as the audience, I think is what is resonant to me about the movie, is that there are things in the world that we will never know the answers to. And you just have to grapple with that as you go through life.
I kind of like this, if they were going to make the sequel, what we came up with, that Klaus is really this leader of this thing. And he's using her as a paper tiger, Josh.
Right. And it could be, because she's a true believer and she really honestly believes that she's from the future, but he's manipulating her for his ends. Again, there's another moment where the FBI agent tells Lorna, I'm going to tell you why they really want a kid. And then we don't see what she says. We don't hear what she says.
Well, how frustrating is that, though? Come on, man. Tell us, dude.
Yeah. So, Jason, you were saying there was like one scene that you thought was really powerful that you wanted to see more of. Is that the kid scene or
that
is that
was
something
the scene?
Else? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I thought that scene was so good. And then I wanted the climax from that.
Right. Yeah. This isn't a movie that really quite builds to a climax. I mean, it does build to that moment between the two of them, but it's not cathartic. It doesn't resolve anything particularly. But were there any other moments that you thought were especially powerful?
Well, no, I like the film. I think the whole idea of like how they had to, get to the basement where they go to a house and, they have to strip down and shower to make sure that they're not taking any recording devices with them. So when he does he swallows a recording or a transmitter, right?
Right. Yeah. He has a camera in his
signal.
glasses, but they can't get the footage back because they're too far from the transmitter.
Right. So he swallows his transmitter, and then of course Maggie makes them all barf in the thing. So he barfs it up, and that was a good suspenseful moment where it is to see if they were going to catch him or not.
Right. Yeah, that's a great scene. And another thing where you wonder, like, okay, he's decided he's going to swallow this transmitter so that they can finally get their recordings. And that happens to be on the day that she's leading them through this strange exercise that involves them all barfing stuff up. Like, does she somehow know? And then, of course, even after he does barf it up and it's right there on the floor, he's able to grab it quickly. And it doesn't seem like anyone realizes that was what he was doing, but maybe she knows somehow.
Right. I did not interpret it that way. I just brought it on the surface level with the suspense of the whole.
All right, well, that's fair too. I mean, it is a very suspenseful moment. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just feel like it's any moment in this movie where it got basic, it's got suspense or whatever, but it's also trying to structure it around the idea of questioning the reality and the motivations of everything that's going on.
Yeah. And it's got a young Constance Wu.
It does. Yes. Constance. I mean, most of the actors in this film are not well known now, nor were they then. But yes, she plays one of the cult members. And of course, James Urbaniak in a weird blonde wig or dyed blonde hair as the father of Abigail Pritchett. He has like two lines.
Who we spoke about on our American Splendor episode.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy in a bunch of
random
roles. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. He's always kind of a quirky little presence there. So
Josh, you said this was number one. You think it is as good now as it was then, Josh?
More or less. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would put this at number one if I went and revisited everything that's on my list there. And we will get to revisit Argo later, so we'll see how I feel about that. Or maybe it would actually be on my 2011 list if we strictly go by premiere dates. But I still think it's very good. I was wondering that especially because, as we'll talk about, I'm sure that Brit Marling and Zal Batmanglij have done a bunch of similar things since this, and that maybe it would feel less fresh or less effective than the later versions of this. And I mean, it's clearly, I think that they've refined some of these ideas as they've gone along, but that's not always necessarily great. And I feel like the rawness of this is very effective. Brit Marling is so good. She is scary as hell in this movie. Like, I don't know if we're supposed to like Maggie, but to me, Maggie is frightening.
I wasn't scared at all, but Josh, you're scared of a lot of women for a lot of different reasons.
I mean, I didn't mean I was scared in the same sense as like watching a horror movie, but she seemed like a scary, like if I encountered her, I would find her scary. Like,
oh yeah. Like she could just stab you and not think twice about it.
Right. She seems like she's got that, or, how manipulative she is. That whole, again, going back to that scene where everyone barfs, like, she's doing a very cult leadery thing of trying to break these people down emotionally and get into their trauma and all this kind of stuff that you end up seeing in all these documentaries about cult leader techniques, and she's very good at it.
Yeah. I don't think I could be a cult leader. Could you?
A leader? No, definitely not. No. I hope I wouldn't be a cult follower either, but I'd be more worried.
I don't think you would be a cult follower. I don't think so. I don't see that for you.
I appreciate that. I mean, I feel like I would just be, I didn't even like doing summer camp activities. I would, if we're sitting in a circle and everyone's supposed to do something, I would just be like, no, I'm leaving.
The thing about being the cult leader, it feels like it takes so much energy. Yeah, you have people helping you and surrounding you, but like, it's just a lot of work.
It is. And you always have to be like emotionally available for all of your followers because they put so much of themselves onto you.
Well, right. Or, kind of, as you said, manipulate them into thinking.
Right. But either way, you have to be emotionally on all the time.
Yeah.
This reminds me when Peter, it's starting to like become clear that he's like kind of falling for the cult, and his partner's trying to get him to like get out of
Lorna.
it. Yeah, Lorna. He says something along the lines of like, what do you want your life to be, like sneaking 40s into foreign films and getting drunk and going to art installations? And I'm like, that sounds way better than going to a cult.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's saying that.
So that's a cult you could go for.
Right. Yeah. That sounds like a pretty fun cult. But Yeah, I mean, he's saying that, I think, in reference to the idea that they need to make their documentary so that they can follow through. But they don't seem to really be working very hard on making the documentary.
Right. No. Which, of course, now would be a podcast.
Yes, it would be a podcast. They're like the characters from the beginning of David Gordon Green's Halloween who are trying to make a podcast about Michael Myers. Something like that.
There you go. I was going to go with Only Murders in the Building.
There you go. That's a less disturbing, creepy option to talk about there.
Which, of course, you'll say was directly influenced by this film.
It clearly wasn't.
Steve Martin and Martin Short were just watching it together one night, and Only Murders 3 seasons later, right, Josh?
I don't think so. No, but I enjoy that. Right. I enjoy that show very much. It's a
me
fun
too.
Show. Yeah.
Should we rate this thing, Josh?
Yeah, Jason's done with this movie. What do you got?
You keep saying that, but it's like the movie's only 86 minutes and we dissected it in a lot of different ways. Do you want to go minute by minute on this thing or what?
No, let's wrap it up here. You want to
5 out of 5 secret handshakes?
Yeah, those are long handshakes too.
Nice.
Yeah. So 3.5. Almost got it to 4 at one point, but too many unanswered questions that I would have liked to answer. 3.5.
Well, that's a good. I'm happy with that rating. I'm glad you appreciated this film.
I like the film. Yeah, I like it.
Good.
Yeah, so,
I give it a 4 out of 5, and I like it too. I like it a lot. Maybe I'm not as wowed by it now, but I still think it's a really good movie, and it's kind of underrated at this point because it's maybe been overshadowed by their later stuff. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
I'm going 3.5. I feel like I was 4 back when I first saw it, but like you said, I think like they seem to just be refining the same thing sort of in their, future projects. So kind of loses a little bit there, but it's still really good.
And I don't think they're overshadowed. I just think they're not in the thought process at all of most people at this time.
Well, I mean, if you were interested in their work and you watch the OA, this is kind of like a proto version of that. And so people might not appreciate it as much.
Let's save that for segment 3 on Awesome Movie Year Legacy.
Yes. We'll put up a big title card that says 3 before we get to this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2012, we are talking about my pick, which is Sound of My Voice from Brit Marling and Zal Batmanglij. And we've mentioned their subsequent work here. Immediately afterwards, they made a film called The East, which had some similarities, but was without the science fiction-y elements. It was about an eco-terrorist group. And I remember liking that, but not as much as this. Did you see that one, Jason?
Yeah. I mean, I was all on this train to see all their work together. And I agree with you. This is the best of the bunch.
Right. And so from there, then, and as we said, The East was not a success at the box office. And so they ended up, their next project together was a TV series called The OA, which deals with a lot of the same themes here and is something that has a big cult following and stars Brit Marling as a woman who claims to be not from the future, but to have had some sort of interdimensional experience and is gathering followers. And there's a lot of similarities there. And, I watched the first season of it and I really enjoyed it, but as much as it feels like on the one hand, they're refining and expanding on these ideas, on the other hand, I felt like this 85-minute version of it was maybe a bit more satisfying than a whole season.
Well, my frustration with the OA is it was 2 seasons. And by the time I wanted to get into it, people who were like, finished with season 2 were like, oh man, there's not going to be any more. And like Netflix did what it does to shows like this, where like you want a satisfying resolution or ending and they cancel it before you get the chance to get that.
Right. I mean, they had a plan apparently for a 5-season story and they only got to make 2 seasons. And I think now when people come into Netflix, they have the sense that unless you're Stranger Things, you're not going to get more than 2 or 3 seasons. And maybe they planned for that more. And that was not what happened a few years ago.
So, Josh, the new thing they're doing together does not sound nearly as interesting. It's going to be on FX. It's called Retreat. The series follows Darby Hart, an amateur detective who tries to solve a murder that takes place at a retreat in a remote location where she and 11 other guests are invited by a billionaire to participate. So it's Glass Onion.
But not funny.
but not funny. And and Josh, I could argue that Glass Onion is Glass Onion, but not funny.
Oh man, Jason coming for Glass Onion in this episode.
I mean, dude, I think we could all agree that a lot of people overrated Glass Onion.
Well, that's a whole unrelated separate subject, but I mean, I will disagree with you that doesn't sound interesting. I mean, it doesn't sound like just another version of Sound of My Voice or the OA, but I'm okay with that. I think they can do one different thing.
Yeah, I'm open. I hope it is great.
Yeah.
I'm just saying conceptually, it sounds like they've narrow casted.
Yeah, but maybe they got burned when they made this extremely ambitious thing that they were not allowed to finish. So maybe they're trying to do something a little more self-contained, and I don't blame them for that.
Of course, all you fans out there should watch Arbitrage, a great film that also stars Brit Marling.
Yeah, and she had this kind of period because she was a big breakout where she did a bunch of acting roles in movies like Arbitrage and The Company You Keep, and she was on a TV series called Babylon. But it really seems like she was not all that interested in an acting career, which I assume she could have much more extensive a career, in films or in TV series or whatever. And once Babylon ended in 2014, she hasn't acted in anything other than stuff that she has herself written and produced since 2014.
And I saw this quote that says she much prefers to act in other people's work than her own.
And that's, well, I mean, maybe she just prefers not to be acting, but she is acting in Retreat. In Retreat. She's definitely one of the stars. So
yeah, I think she is the star, one or the main two.
Yeah. I mean, that main character that's mentioned in the synopsis is played by Emma Corrin. So who knows how big her role is, but I'm sure it's not small. So but it's just interesting. It seemed to me, I mean, maybe that quote counteracts it. To me, it seemed like she's more interested in being able to take control of projects as a writer and a producer rather than working as an actor.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, Josh, Christopher Denham will be talking about later in this season, or at least the film he was in, Argo.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah, he plays Peter. We haven't actually mentioned the names of these lead actors, Christopher Denham and Nicole Vicius, who plays Lorna. But yeah, he's definitely very much a guy that you kind of recognize and think, I think I've seen that guy before. He's in a lot of TV episodes. He was on The Gilded Age and Shining Girls recently, was on Billions. So yeah, he's all over. But, no breakouts from this unless you count Brit Marling.
Yeah, but he's working a lot. He's going to be in Oppenheimer and a John Slattery directed effort called Maggie Moore's, which is about a small town where crime never happens, and then two women named Maggie Moore are both murdered.
That sounds interesting.
It does. And also, he's in the new Luc Besson movie, Dogman, which we talked about in our antiviral episode because Caleb Landry Jones is.
Wow, so many connections being made here. Good job, Jason.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm here to thread this whole thing together.
You are indeed. Nicole Vicious basically stopped acting after this film. She has one further credit in 2013, and I was trying to look up and see if she's doing something else these days or whatever, but I found nothing on her, so who knows? But she's good here.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I agree with you because I think she's a good actress here too.
Yeah, I mean, all the acting is solid here, and again, on this low budget indie level, sometimes you get questionable performances or whatever, but I thought they were both good, even though Brit Marling clearly overshadows them because of her really ethereal screen presence.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So we mentioned that this is one of the first roles for Constance Wu, who of course is the biggest star of anybody involved in this film. Right. Fresh Off the Boat, Hustlers, Crazy Rich Asians. James Urbaniak, who is also a very recognizable character actor and, comedy actor a lot. And to me, I was fascinated by the cinematographer of this film is Rachel Morrison. And this was her second feature. And she's gone on to become a major cinematographer. She's the first woman ever nominated for a Best Cinematography Oscar for her work on Mudbound. And she's also become a director and done a lot of TV. So she's gone on to a much bigger career.
Oh, I'll have to look out for her.
You do that. So that's all I got on the legacy here.
That's good.
Yeah.
You did a good job.
Thank you. So you got anything else?
Nicole Vicius, Josh, maybe we could watch her film when we do a holiday episode called A Jersey Christmas.
Well, that sounds like a film that you'll enjoy, certainly, or that you would have written, perhaps.
Yeah, either way, really.
All right. Well, that is Sound of My Voice. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can join our cult online and on social media.
Yes, and please give us tithings, Josh.
Yes, thank you.
We're at Awesome Movie Year on the .com. We're at Awesome Movie Year on the FB and the IG, and we're at Awesome Movie Pod on the Twits. So still waiting on that Mastodon account, Dave. I'm Jason Harris Comedy on all those socials, or Jay Harris Comedy. I used to have a website, Go for Jason, that got kicked out of a cult, but now I started another one called Eat This Comedy that might start its own new cult. You could also look up Eat This Comedy or The Trivia Party on Instagram.
You can find me at joshbellhateseverything.com, at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces.
It's kind of like a cult, right?
Yeah.
Dave's the
absolutely.
cult.
Yeah.
See, Jason, you and I couldn't be cult leaders, but Dave already is a cult leader.
You know, he's doing a terrible job. He really needs to rein in the cult if you're going to go.
I'm not as pretty as Brit Marling either.
That's your
Well,
problem.
that's
right?
a good. That's a good.
All right. What do we have in our next episode, Jason?
Josh, it's time for my guy Mads. It's a foreign film. It's our foreign film of 2012. It's an important one, and it's got Mads Mikkelsen, who I love, and it's called The Hunt, which is clearly not going to be as happy as this promo for The Hunt.
Yeah. We've really got a string of very downbeat films for some reason happening this season. So
don't worry, we pick up the levity when it gets to my pick again.
I look forward to that.
Hey, but The Hunt is a movie that we're excited to cover.
We are. So tune in next time for The Hunt, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.